do is we will do a sort of question and answer session, but if anybody's got questions, by all means jump in halfway through. We don't mind answering questions while we're going along. So we've got a few pictures basically just to act as a sort of a visual cue. But basically I'll deal with Chrissie mostly. I'm just going to be half interviewer and half interviewee today. So I've known Chrissie for a good number of years. Unfortunately I didn't get to work on the early part of the Alien franchise. I sort of came on board on AVP. But Chrissie's been on the franchise, worked on several of the films, so we're going to start off with Chrissie first of all. Chrissie, well basically how did you get involved with working on Aliens?
I'd worked previous to that on Dark Crystal with the art director Terry Ackland-Snow and also the great sculptor Peter Voisey, who sadly died now. And Peter was one of the sculptors on the first Alien film. And I truthfully can't remember which one of them called me, but one of them did anyway. I ended up in the at the beginning of the film in the art department making art department maquettes, which shows you make a miniature of things to show the director and he could say yes he likes it, no he doesn't, or what changes. Hopefully are made in the early stages, which doesn't always follow of course, because very often you change things halfway through. And that was my introduction to the project. Throughout the project, like most people on that film, we jumped around. So I then went into the creature sculpting department, sculpting the Alien Queen with Stan Winston and his crew. And then later we were just all on set. And it was because we were not in the studio, we were out in Acton Power Station. It was a kind of all hands on deck thing where somebody'd shout, "Oh, Chrissie, can you come and help?" And you'd run and paint a bit of set, or somebody else off painters would come and help us. It was very much kind of everybody muck in, which is what happens in those off studio projects a lot of the time. You just get.
Okay.
Thank you.
I mean, it's somewhat well documented, but very briefly. We've got a picture of the APC up there. Do you want to tell them a little bit of the history about what that was?
This was Terry's brainwave. He managed to get hold of a tug from the airport that's just used for towing aircraft in and out, and it was just dressed up and adapted to suit the film. I think it worked very well.
Yeah, I believe these things are normally loaded with about 500 tons of lead to enable them to sort of pull.
We had to reinforce the entranceway of the power station.
I think a lot of the lead came out as well.
To get it in.
Yeah, they found driving into Bacton Power Station, the floors were caving in, so they had to basically redress this. I think we've got another photograph of that later on there. Yeah. Now, this was actually one of the miniatures that was done by the Skotak brothers. But as you see, it sort of ties together very nicely. This was something we touched on before. You know, all the effects for Aliens were done the sort of traditional way in camera. The dropship in the background there, we know that James Cameron was a bit of a Thunderbirds fan, and in fact his brief for the dropship was that he wanted something like Thunderbird 2. And that's the reason that picture's in there. Basically it's a big craft standing on legs with a pod that drops down with a vehicle in it. It's green, and even the second one's got a 2 written on the side of it. So that was his sort of nod really to the old Jerry Anderson days. Do you remember what scale those were made at roughly?
Quarter, I think.
About quarter scale, something like that.
I mean, I think that miniature was probably about the length of this, I think.
Yeah, so quite large.
Yeah.
Quite large. Did you get involved with the miniature stuff on the floor like this?
Yeah, I was doing some of the rock dressing and chucking sand around and that sort of thing, but not because I'm not a technical model maker. I wasn't involved in the actual mechanical models, apart from this one.
This was one of yours, I believe, yeah?
This was my only technical model. It's the flamethrower that Sigourney carries around. And that was one of the first things I did on the project. And I'm not a hardware modeler by any stretch of the imagination. And the art department had produced a drawing for Jim to look at for this flamethrower, which he hated, because it looked like a thing for spraying fruit trees. It was garden pestism. It was awful. And he handed me this thing, which was just a little gas bottle and a couple of copper pipes coming out on an on-off switch that the effects department had produced. So it just physically worked, but looked like a gas bottle with 2 copper pipes. It'd make this look like a flamethrower. Okay, I'll have a try. So I just bodged a load of plasticine around the thing and rummaged through the box of kit parts and things and stuck a load on. And then, they looked okay, apart from the gas bottle still looked like a gas bottle. I thought, what am I going to do with this? And Peter Voisey and I had a box of cakes for tea. I think it was somebody's birthday or something. And I thought, and you know, in those cake boxes you get the plastic corrugated cake wrapper, and it was bright pink. I thought, I know, and I rummaged through the dustbin and fetched out the pink cake wrapper, cut it up, glued it on the gas bottle, and suddenly it looked technical. I sprayed the thing black and left it on my bench as for Jim Cameron to look at, but I was expecting him to say, yeah, that's the sort of lines, because I'd just done it really quickly. I was expecting him to say, yeah, that's the kind of thing we're looking for, now do a proper one. And when I got back to my desk the next morning, it had gone, and it had been taken away, and there was a note from Jim saying, great job, Chrissie, well done, and it had gone to the mould makers, and that was the one that you see there.
With a Mr. Kipling cake thing stuck on it.
Cake wrapper, yes.
Yeah, we were talking about a lot of the effects were sort of done the traditional way. Again, some of this is on, obviously, the extras that are on the DVD, but this particular one is a blue screen shot. But this is really just to illustrate that things like the clouds, it's just straightforward cotton wool. If you shoot things, you know, light them correctly, that's half the battle, is lighting the stuff correctly and getting the camera move right. And quite often they'll do sort of 2 or 3 variations on something and pick the best way. But this is typically sort of, you know, British filmmaking, cheap, no money, be more creative kind of way of doing things. And again, this was a classic example. I mean, this would nowadays would probably be done digitally. But that really is just a layer of cotton wool with a spotlight underneath it. And there's a rising column that is just lifted up. So it just lifts up this round donut of cotton wool. And in fact, if you look at it in the film, they hold on it a little bit too long because it kind of goes up and then just stops for a few seconds. But it's still very, very effective. And I say, you know, done today, if it was done digitally, they you know, it'd fill the screen and people get blown off their seats and everything else. But it's just really to illustrate that there are ways of doing these things. One of the things that it's very funny actually nowadays. When you have a limited budget or limited time to do something, and there isn't always an easy way of doing something, it forces you to be creative, and sometimes you end up with a better result because of that. And it's not something you consciously go out to do, but it's something that the old traditional British special effects men, who traditionally have always had to make stuff out of Kellogg's cornflakes packets because they've got no money to do anything else, it makes you find ways to shoot things and different ways to do things that can be very, very effective. And I did this yesterday, and again, I don't want to get too into the sort of CG versus models thing, but I think if they were to remake Aliens today, obviously a lot of it would be done digitally, but I don't think it would look the same, and I don't think it would have the same impact. I just, the computer guys are going to crack it eventually, but for the time being, I still think doing stuff in camera, is the way to go. And I don't know whether people agree with that or not, but they like seeing real things. But you feel like you're getting your money's worth. Do you want to add on that?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Chris has said, really. Yeah, sure, carry on. Mm-hmm. Yes, I think... I have to talk about this now.
Oh, yeah, this is a classic example of doing things the old-fashioned traditional way, which again, Chrissie was involved with this.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the idea of a foreground miniature, anybody? You make a small piece of set close to camera, then the actors interact with it like several yards away.
Behind the piece.
This was, because Acton Power Station was such a huge space, it would have been way too expensive to build sets in that area of the full size. So this, I'll have to get up and show you, is a foreground miniature.
Are we okay to move the cameras?
So they built set up to about a little bit taller than this room probably. And the join line of the foreground miniature is just across here. So from here on up, it was just a couple of sheets of polystyrene, about 8 feet long, so deep just that I just sculpted into the shapes, and then it was covered in.
It's carved in polystyrene. And
Something like polyfiller and just painted over. And when we filmed it, Steve Begg, who was with me on the camera, some of the actors shine a big flashlight and you see the light go across, and he was just standing on our side of the camera with a little pen torch matching what the actors were doing, and it looks as if they're shining a big flashlight at it.
So it's all part of the visual deceit that just kind of sells it as being a real shot.
Nothing to do, and it probably would have cost a fortune to do in CG or in a full set.
Yeah. That's something else when shooting miniatures that people don't appreciate. You don't just scale down the size of the subject that you're trying to shoot. You have to scale down the lighting as well. I was sort of fortunate. Yeah, I was kind of fortunate to get involved with Red Dwarf when we did the hangar sequence for the 8th series, where the Starbug crashes into the hangar, and we obviously built a miniature hangar for it. But you also need to put little small spotlights, so there are little pools of light. So you actually sort of scale the lighting as well, and it all just helps to sell it. I was also involved a little bit on Casino Royale. There's a bit with a prototype airliner, the Skyfleet airliner. And again, it was a huge hangar set, but it was the same thing. There were spotlights in the ceiling. Actually, the ones that just ordinary household spotlights, but you smoke up the set just a little bit, so there's just a hint of haze in the air, and it means that you can see the beams of light. And plus, you get these little pools of light on the floor. But again, it scales down the actual lighting as well as the subject itself, and it can look very, very realistic. But anyway, moving on. There we go. Oh, Alien Queen. This is another one of your subjects.
Yeah.
How much sort of development work had been done on this? Was this the drawings?
They had about 18 months, I think, prep, working it out, and then they brought it to England and said, "Now, come on, hurry up, you guys, and do this, and you've got a few weeks," like they usually do. There was about 4 of us sculpting the Queen, because on a big piece like this, you can't do it single-handed unless you got weeks and weeks and weeks. So it's just always a group effort. I sculpted a lot of her tail section and her arm, and that's me.
You there. Yeah,
a younger and thinner version of me on there sculpting one of her arms.
Is that you on the left or the right? You still look good. You still look good. And how long did you work on that for then? Say 3 or 4 weeks, and there was 3 or 4 of you working on it?
Yeah, I think we had about 4 weeks or something sculpted.
So how would you go about making something like, obviously sculpting it in clay first, or then taking moulds?
Yes, there'd be a steel armature, which you can see some of here. Here's part of the armature for some of the rest of her, is that. And it's built in steel, and then probably clad in polystyrene and just taped round. And then you build a clay on top of that, which is what this is. It's just clay. When that's completed and finished, it's then moulded and then cast out in the rubber material that she finally was made in.
And it was completely rubber, was it? There was no fiberglass in it, or all done in rubber, as you recall?
There's fiberglass in the supports, like in the head section thing, just because of the shape of it would have collapsed if it was just rubber. So
how did you find James Cameron to work with? Was he fairly good to work with?
He was great with any of our departments because he likes stuff. He likes things that he can pick up and handle. So we didn't really get any of the flack from him because he'd come into our department and say, "Oh, hey, this is really cool," because he could physically pick the things up. So he was good with us. We didn't have trouble.
I was told a story, actually, funny enough, last week, and I'll retell it, that apparently James Cameron was actually on points as far as the movie was concerned, which meant he gets a percentage of what it does. And in fact, it got to the point where 20th Century Fox weren't prepared to put more money in it, yet he wasn't satisfied with some of the model shots, and so he actually put some of his own money in. I think it was something like £200,000. So that was one of the reasons he was geeing up all the crew. He's going, "Come on, this is my money, get on with it," sort of thing. But he wanted to shoot some model shots exactly the way that he wanted it, and I think it paid off because it meant it was a better film and he would make his money back when the film was successful. So that was something, I don't know whether many people know that, but he had actually put his own personal money into it, so that was quite good. This is another sort of typical traditional film special effect, in as much as I believe that's the third scale Alien. Was it third scale, quarter
Yeah.
scale, third scale? That was done. That's a rear projection shot. They did a lot of rear projection on Aliens. The bit when the dropship crashes is obviously a miniature that's filmed separately, and the actors are performing in front of a screen. So you can see all the action that's going on in the background, and providing you get your contrast levels and everything else right, the foreground action matches the background action. It's usually you can't really tell. Did you get involved with the third scale Alien at all?
No, I wasn't involved with that one.
Not at all.
No, not
Was that
at
shot
all.
over here, or was that shot separately, and the footage
Here.
brought over, or?
I think it was shot here.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was shot after main unit filming.
Was this all part of Stan Winston's group,
Yeah.
or all right?
Well, he was involved, and the effects crew.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on from that. Oh, jump forward. This is Alien versus Predator. I've thrown this one in because I claim authorship of this, so just so I've got something to say as well. At the start of the film, we had a crew in the UK that were actually building the models and then shipping them out to Prague where they were shooting it. In fact, it was the old Messerschmitt factory, which I found more interesting actually than working on the film. But no, it was the it was the old Messerschmitt factory in Prague, and we shipped all the miniatures out there. There were 2 units. One of our group volunteered to go out there and sort of supervise the models when he was out there, and in fact he ended up with a larger group than we had in the UK, and that was Richard Vandenberg, and in fact he ended up directing some of the miniature shots, but most of the stuff was actually built in the UK. At the start of the film, it starts off, you see a sort of surveillance satellite going over the Earth, and then the next shot you see an array of radio telescopes, receiving the signals, and in fact it was just this one model that they digitally multiplied up in the shot. And in fact, if you look very carefully, you can see all the weathering streaks on the dish are exactly the same on all of them as a result. But that was, I claim authorship to that. Richard Sinclair built some of the lower section, but I basically built the top half and painted it and weathered it. That's a motion control model, which means that you can tilt it up and down and rotate it side to side. For one shot, essentially, I think there was about 3 months' work in that, and you actually only see, I think you see it for just the one shot. And in fact, the curve piece, actually, I'll get up for this as well very quickly. This curve section here, the whole thing pivots around here, and there's a huge, great lump of lead in the back of that, so that it counterbalances it. It's absolutely neutral because there's a motion control motor that has to move it. Has to move it up and down. And most of this ribbing, in fact, is plastic. This was an old satellite receiving dish, like your Sky TV or whichever, made out of aluminium, which was lightweight. I took a vac form moulding off of it to make it lightweight, and again, all this ribbing was done out of plastic. All this stuff here is EMA. It's the same handrail, technically, that's in Aliens. All the atmosphere processing plant, again, is mostly made out of EMA components. EMA is a company near Shepperton that do plastic components, architectural components. They do tubes, hemispheres, handrails, ladders in various scales, and we obviously just buy loads of the stuff because it's much easier than trying to make it. So, that was one of my contributions. Oh, that's the finished scene in the film there. So if you look very carefully, all the weathering streaks are the same on all of them. In fact, I've got to confess, I did cheat there. I went down to Cornwall, and there was a telecommunications place down near Bude, which has got a load of different communication dishes like this. And I took a photograph of most of the different types. And John Bruno, who was the effects director on that, I showed him the photographs and basically said, "Which one do you want?" He went, "I like that one." Okay, and I built one. So there we go. That was the satellite that actually opens the film. That was built by Steve Howarth. That was probably about 6 feet long, something like that in total. In fact, again, if you watch the film, there's a bit of a cheat going on, because when you first see it, you see it in silhouette with all these spikes coming off of it, and the idea is to make it kind of look like the alien queen. You're not quite certain what you're looking at, and as it passes overhead and the camera looks at it from the back, suddenly all these spikes have gone. So, and it looks far more like a satellite, so there's a little bit of a visual cheat there. You worked on AVP too, didn't you, Chrissie? We worked together. What was your contribution on that? Didn't you do
I made third scale figures of the Predator and also Sanaa Lathan, the actress, which I'm sorry I didn't bring any pictures of. And I was involved in other bits. I was painting things, and I did a bit of work on the icebreaker.
Yeah. There's some pictures of the ship coming up shortly. The helicopter was an interesting one. We had to produce again, it was just a body shell for a motion control shot. They wanted something sort of futuristic. In fact, it's a sort of a hybrid helicopter because, being at the Messerschmitt factory, they decided obviously the best helicopter to shoot, the interior scenes in would be a 1950s Russian, old coffee grinder helicopter that they just happened to have lying around. So it meant that we had to sort of find a futuristic-looking helicopter body shell and then alter all the windows to match the windows of the live-action set. And in fact, that's a commercially bought body shell moulding that we heavily altered. But I think Richard Sinclair did that one.
Yeah.
That was a relatively quick one. But the icebreaker that you see in the background there, and I think we've got a shot later on. I'll tell you what, I'll come back to that one. That's the icebreaker model there. That's actually 17 feet long. And there was a crew of about 6 of us worked on that. And it's basically made out of MDF. Clad in lithoplate. Lithoplate is like a thin aluminium sheet that you can printers use, that we can emboss rivets into and sort of add fold creases to. And we would cut out sections of these and stick it onto the MDF, and it would look like a ship that's been battered a bit. Normally with ships you can see where the bulkheads are and the structure underneath it. And again, all the lighting was practical. All the lighting we put in, things like the radar dishes, the radar turning on the top, were all done with motion control motors, so that we could repeat the shots and do them multiple passes and repeat it each time. The landscape, actually, we did shoot a lot of the landscape for real. Some of the shots they did sort of go back in and digitally enhance it, but basically with all the Arctic shots, we did actually produce. The room was about the size of this room, possibly a little bit more, covered in snow, and most of the snow was dendritic salt, just ordinary table salt. We had sacks and sacks and sacks of salt, which is very, very good for sort of replicating snow. You can damp it down so it goes clumpy, or you can leave it dry and it's smooth, with obviously the odd carved iceberg sort of sticking out of it. This was all done in Prague. We built the ship in the UK and shipped it out to Prague, and then Richard Vandenberg's group set it all out and laid down the snowy scene. In fact, there's a little bit of a nonsense going on there. That particular scene is showing the unloading of the snowcats. They had 6. I'll go back to that previous picture. They had 6 full-size snowmobiles, and we had to reproduce these at 1/6 scale, which is Action Man size. A 12-inch figure next to it would be in scale, and they were going to be shot the traditional way, pulled on a wire. So we're over cranking the camera at 2.5 times normal speed, so that they would appear to move realistically when you played it back. But it meant that things like the windscreen wipers, I went over there with Bill and I actually timed the windscreen wipers on the full-size snowcats, so I could then go back and make up a little mech and a motor that made the windscreen wipers on our models go 2.5 times normal speed. So when it got played back, there would be continuity between the models and the full-size ones. I'll go on to that a little bit in a minute. This was again something that about 10 minutes before we broke for lunch one day, they said to me, the next scene we're going to be doing the unloading of the snowcats, and we want a close-up on the bow of the ship. Yeah, fine, great. I said, we're going to shoot it after lunch. Great. Can you snow it up? Right, okay. So they all buggered off to lunch and left me on my own in the soundstage. And basically all the icing and stuff that you see on the bow of that ship, is probably, I would say, probably no more than about 18 inches across, having to fill the cinema screen. And again, this is a good example of the sort of snow and stuff that we do. This is, again, just ordinary table salt that's just been dampened down so it's slightly tacky, and you get a paintbrush and you can just sort of fiddle with it, and it looks like snow that's clumped up underneath the bow of the ship. But the rest of the frosting, it's just an ordinary garden spray, one of these garden misters that you'd water mist your plants with, just literally sprayed over the ship. And then there's bags of icing sugar, and it's like, whoa, just chucking icing sugar on it, and again a little bit of prodding with a brush and sort of a bit of moulding with the snow. But it's very effective, and it looks you can clump it up and make it look very realistic. This was all shot live action, and this was sort of dropped in later, again digitally. This is where I think the computers do work well, where they actually you can composite things. But I think the elements themselves you really need to shoot for real.
Yeah, on their own.
On their own.
Stand up.
Yeah. And that is a shot there. Those are actually the 1/6 scale snowmobiles that we made. Most people didn't even realise that they were miniatures. Very, very quickly sort of going back to those again. There were about 4 variants, and in fact the whole thing obviously has to be scratch built. You can't go out and buy a snowmobile like that. You have to make the whole thing individual track links. There were about 6 or 7 of us actually worked on those. The flashing lights, in addition, the flashing lights are rotating, and again we did the same thing. We timed how fast the rotating lights were on the full-size ones, and then came back and made the rotating lights on ours go 2.5 times the speed. And we're talking about lights that are about that big, probably not more than maybe 3/4 of an inch. And they're the little electric motors out of your mobile phone. Your mobile phone has a tiny little motor in it with a wobbler on it, which is what makes it vibrate. And basically, we use motors from old mobile phones because they're tiny, and they fitted the little light units. And we got a couple of guys who are a bit whizzy with electronics, and they got them running, and with the lights sort of staying on. And that's the sort of thing that we end up doing. Did you go to Prague? You did go to Prague, did you? No, most of the crew. Bill Pearson, who ran the workshop, was pretty good. He gave the opportunity everybody who worked there to at least go over to Prague for a couple of weeks when they were shooting something, for instance, that they'd built. I've actually got, again, unfortunately, like Chrissie, I came a little bit unprepared. I've actually got a disc with about 200 photographs on, but haven't got it with me, so we've had to do from a few screen grabs. But there were probably I think there were a dozen of us in the UK building the stuff, and then there was probably about 24 in Prague by the time we got there. There were some local Prague-y people employed, and there was a British crew out there as well. So yeah, it sort of grew to quite large proportions. The script was very good. We quite enjoyed the script. I'll be honest, we were a little disappointed with the film. The script as it read was quite good, and it answered some of the questions that people have been asking about the history of how did these things get here. I don't know how the film performed reasonably well. Did well enough to make another one.
Well, I suppose.
So, well, yeah.
As long as you guys go and watch them.
That's right, yeah. But no, again, we try to do, I say, as much as possible that's traditional effects. Partly because of cost, but I also think because I think it does look better. I don't know how many people here, just as a straw poll, do you think physical effects look better than CGI? Or question at the back, or is that? Oh, that's an agreement, is it?
Agreeing.
Yeah. If anyone has questions. There are specialised sort of container carriers that take that stuff there, and in fact we do parcel the stuff up relatively easily. We anticipate the chances are there's going to be the odd little breakage, but because there's a crew over there, they can usually easily fix it. And in this particular instance, what happened was the freight company that picked them up, they had, I think there was 2 drivers who were working in relay who were going to drive the stuff to Prague on the back of a lorry. When we flew out there, the stuff was already there. So they'd driven virtually overnight. In fact, it's not as far as you think it is. It is an overnight journey. They were relaying it, and I think it took them just over a day or something like that to get there. So when we flew out there to receive the stuff, it had literally just arrived, and we just uncrate it and check that it's all okay. Things like the radio dish, of course, again, is potentially could get damaged, but we obviously crate the stuff very carefully. Part of the reason for doing the stuff in the UK is that obviously suppliers and things, we know where we can get materials. It's obviously as good to do as much of it as you can where it's easy to do it. I know for a fact that Richard's biggest problem, who I say was running the workshop in Prague, was there's nowhere to buy silicon rubber or moulding materials or anything like that. I think he found there was like one big supplier who'd obviously cottoned on to the fact, hey, there's a market here because there's loads of film companies coming over here and they can't get this stuff. And I think he tracked that company down, and fortunately, he was able to source materials. So all of a sudden it became a lot easier. But it can be a nightmare. I worked on a film in Canada, which I won't mention because it was dreadful. Nice crew, but dreadful film. We had the same problem. Canada surprised us because they've got very, very health and safety conscious over there. And even things like solvent for sticking plastic together, solvent glue, dreadful. You hold the two pieces of plastic together and you put a little bit of solvent along the join, hold it for about 10 minutes, didn't make any difference. The moment you let go of it, it fell to pieces. And we cheated, in fact. We got a big steel container in the UK. Bill flew back to Britain and loaded up this container with super glue, paints, you name it, everything that you're not supposed to import, hid it behind a load of cardboard boxes, and miraculously it got through. But what was nice about it, the vindication was that the Canadian crew who were working with us as well, we sort of got this stuff out and they're using the same materials and they're going, God, this super glue is brilliant, And so, it can be a bit problematic working abroad. Most of them get their act together fairly quickly. The funny thing about working abroad is that, generally speaking, countries come into fashion for making films, and it's not about necessarily how good the technicians are. It really is down to the dollar exchange rate. Wherever it's cheap to make a movie, wherever the labour's cheap, that's where they tend to go. So for a period, they went to Australia. For a period, they went to Prague, Hungary, Ireland used to give them tax incentives. There's all sorts of reasons for going to different countries, and it's nearly always down to what represents the best value for money. Sometimes that can be a false economy, because by the time you've sent an English crew out there or a crew over there and you've paid for the hotel and taxis and food and all that stuff, you're going, do you know what, it would have been easy just to stay in the UK and do it, or wherever the film happens to be based. So
plus you spend a lot of your time training up the people they give you to work with.
Yeah, that's the problem, because you're forced to take on a certain number of people from the sort of host country, which is fine if they're experienced and they know what they're doing. But
usually you spend a lot of time showing them what to do.
Yeah, I mean this is the sort of bone of contention that we often have. I mean, often you get newcomers to the industry, and you can tell normally within 10 minutes if somebody's enthusiastic and got a little bit of gumption and is going to do things, and those that basically thinking, do you know what, go home because you're going to be eaten alive. People often employ a lot of new people because they're relatively cheap being a first job, and in some cases they're prepared to work for nothing, which is actually not really the thing to do. They think it's cheaper to get 4 beginners in rather than one experienced person, but the fact is that the 4 beginners can actually cost you money, where an experienced person, you can give them the job, you say, go away, bring it back on Friday, and they know it's going to be done. It's going to come in on Friday and it's done. So, again, working on AVP, and I'm not going to name him, some of the guys here know who it is, and I'll do this very briefly, but we did have a young guy who's very, very keen on Aliens, and we sort of brought him in, and he was a bit useless.
Yes.
Didn't you grab him by the collar and shake him at one stage? What was the story behind that?
The rest of the crew were given this guy as assistant. Oh, give him to Bill, give him to so-and-so, give him to... And the guys got really fed up with him very quickly. And they said, we'll give him to Chrissie because she's a woman and she'll be more gentle with him. She'll be nice to him. And I did try. I tried very, very hard. And I kept showing him how to do this thing, and he kept doing it wrong, and I'd go and quietly explain again, and saying, look, if you do it this way, it's much better. And then he was sitting behind me, and I could hear him doing it wrong. The noise that was coming up, I knew it was wrong. And I got up again to say, look, just see if you can do, and as I got close to him, I lost my patience. And I grabbed him by the collar and said, will you stop doing it?
All we could see was his little head going backwards and forwards like this.
And he was a very tall, lanky guy. He had a big fluffy ponytail and always wore a bobble hat. And all the guys looked round and they said, all we could see was his head kind of doing this as I was shaking him.
We're going to have to draw this to a close, I think, very, very shortly. Any questions anybody wants to ask? Well, we'll do a quick question and answer. Another question, please. The problem was...
Well, it is an effect shot. You can either do it like that, or you can do it with CG, or you can take a snowmobile to the Arctic and film it there, which is obviously much, you know, prohibitively expensive. The cheap way to do it is this.
The part of the problem was that it hadn't snowed. Simple as that. They went out there, and in fact, they think they found a football pitch. There's all street lights in the background. I don't know what made them think that was going to be a suitable place to represent the Arctic, but they found a football pitch, and they covered it. They covered it in about 2 inches of foam snow, and the very first pass the full-size snowcats went through it, and there was just a trail of mud everywhere, and it just didn't look like the Arctic, and so we ended up doing it as a miniature. And again, going back to this thing about keeping it simple, they're pulled on a wire. There's 4 of them. There's basically there were 4 of them side by side. They were sort of, some were slightly in front of others. A wire coming off of each one, going to a big pole, wooden pole across the front of the set, and there's 2 guys holding each end of the pole, basically just pulling them along, and that's all it was. And it's never been truer. Again, in the film industry, if you can pull it on a wire, pull it on a wire. We call it KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Because if you make it complicated, it'll go wrong. There's no need to make something complicated unless it has to be complicated. And again, nowadays, to be honest, even if the wires were showing, they'd probably digitally remove the wires. But obviously, we try to hide the wires so you don't have to do that in the first place. Because again, it just adds to the cost, and it's more, post-production. And obviously, they don't like paying for that. They'd much rather just get the thing in the can, the actual day you shoot it. So we do as much as we can.
And as far as something like third scale figures, or whatever scale, quarter scale, whatever size figures, you do things with a miniature figure that you can't do with a human being, because they die. On which even stunt people couldn't do.
Well, the third scale Queens is a classic example, puppeteered as a puppet, because you can do more.
But for the specific shot we're talking about, there was I think a tunnel through the ice.
That's right.
Which was done in miniature. You know, to do a full-size tunnel through the ice is going to take weeks and squillions of pounds to make, and it's a shot where they're on a sledge which is just whizzing down the thing like the Crest are on, which is impossible to do for real. It would add so much on the budget. You'd need stuntmen, and I doubt any of them could do it, because there's a good chance the thing will flip over.
Don't they shoot? They come up it, don't they, at the end, and they shoot out of it as well.
Yeah.
So again,
they just literally
you kill somebody trying to do it.
Down a tunnel, which you couldn't do for
KISS,
real.
keep it simple, stupid. I think we're being indicated that our time's up, I'm afraid. So thank you very much. It's been a very nice audience.